My wife accused me of cheating for working overtime. Her best friend manipulated her until she had a mental breakdown. But when she tried to destroy me with a false restraining order, the truth came out in court and left everyone speechless. I'm 29 years old. I work at a manufacturing plant, and what happened over the last few months basically destroyed my marriage and almost cost me my daughter. I still wake up at 3 in the morning wondering how the hell we got to this point. You know, from planning our future together to my wife literally punching me in the face, accusing me of cheating on her when all I was doing was working overtime to pay the baby's bills. The thing is, none of this would have happened if that snake Kimberly hadn't poisoned Stephanie's head right when she was most vulnerable. But I guess I should start from the beginning so it makes sense. Stephanie and I got married like 4 years ago, and honestly things were going well, like normal, we had our fights but nothing major. We decided to have a baby last year, and Stephanie got pregnant pretty quickly, which made us both super happy. The whole pregnancy was relatively smooth. I mean, she had the typical nausea and complained about back pain, but nothing out of the ordinary from what everyone told me. The problem started in December when Abigail was born, because the delivery was horrible, literally horrible. Stephanie was in labor for like 20 hours, ended up needing an emergency C-section because the baby's heart started having problems, and after she was born, Stephanie lost a lot of blood, and the doctors were really worried for a while. I was terrified. I'm not gonna lie. I thought I was going to lose my wife right there in that hospital. When we finally left the hospital like a week later, Stephanie had to stay longer than normal for recovery. I thought the worst was over. We had this beautiful baby, Abigail, and even though Stephanie was sore and tired, I thought that with time everything would normalize. But it didn't. Not at all. The first weeks at home were brutal, and not just because of the typical stuff of having a newborn who doesn't sleep. Stephanie was weird, like really weird. She didn't want to hold Abigail much, she cried over anything, and there were days where she literally stayed in bed all day staring at the wall. I tried to help as much as I could. I got up at night with the baby, changed diapers, prepared bottles, but I felt like nothing I did was enough. Stephanie looked at me like I was a stranger sometimes, and when I tried to talk to her about how she was feeling, she just said she was tired and asked me to leave her alone. This is where things start to get complicated because I work in manufacturing, and normally I have a regular 8-hour schedule, 5 days a week. But in January, my boss offered me a special project that required extra time, quite a bit of extra time. We're talking like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for at least 2 months. The extra pay was good, really good, and with the hospital expenses and everything for the baby, we desperately needed that money. I mentioned it to Stephanie and she said it was fine, that her mom could come help during the day, and I thought it was a good plan. What I didn't know is that instead of her mom, the person who ended up helping her most of the time was Kimberly, her supposed best friend. Kimberly and Stephanie have known each other since college, and honestly, I never liked that woman. I always felt she had something weird about her, like she was too nosy about our relationship, always making comments about how I didn't do enough for Stephanie or how I should make more money. But Stephanie adored her, like she thought Kimberly was the most loyal and good person in the world, so I put up with it because I didn't want to cause problems. When I started with the overtime in January, Kimberly started showing up more often at the house, helping with Abigail, cooking, cleaning. At first I thought it was good, that Stephanie had company and help, but looking back I should have seen the signs that Kimberly was setting something up. The first weeks of February, Stephanie started acting different with me. She wasn't just distant anymore, now she was like hostile. She asked me weird questions when I got home from work, like where exactly had I been, why I arrived 15 minutes late, who I had talked to during the day. I thought it was part of postpartum depression or whatever, because her behavior had been so erratic since Abigail was born that I didn't know anymore what was normal and what wasn't. One day I got home from work and Stephanie was in the living room with Kimberly, and as soon as I walked in, they both stopped talking and looked at me in a super uncomfortable way. I asked Stephanie if everything was okay, and she just said yes. But Kimberly looked at me with this face of like total contempt that made me feel like I had done something terrible without knowing what. The thing exploded one night in mid-February. I had worked all day, I was dead tired, and when I got home like at 9 at night, Stephanie was waiting for me in the living room with her, arms crossed. Abigail was crying in her crib in the room, which seemed weird to me because normally Stephanie would calm her immediately, but there was the baby screaming and Stephanie just sitting there staring at me. She asked me where I had been, and I told her at work, same as every day, and she told me she didn't believe me, that Kimberly had told her that nobody works that many hours without a reason, and that the reason obviously was that I was having an affair. I froze, literally couldn't process what I was hearing. I told her she was crazy. How could she think that about me? And she started yelling for me to give her my phone, that if I had nothing to hide, I should give it to her right now. I gave her the phone, obviously, because I had absolutely nothing to hide. Stephanie spent like an hour checking every message, every call, every photo, while I tried to calm Abigail, who kept crying. She didn't find anything because there was nothing to find, but instead of apologizing or at least admitting she was wrong, she just threw the phone at me and said I probably had another phone hidden or was using apps she didn't know about. I couldn't believe what was happening. Like this was my wife, the woman I had promised to spend my life with, and she was looking at me like I was a criminal. I asked her why Kimberly had put that idea in her head, and she yelled at me to stop blaming Kimberly, that Kimberly was the only person who truly cared about her. Things got much worse after that night. Stephanie started acting like a detective, and when I say detective, I mean she literally checked my clothes when I got home from work, smelled my shirts looking for perfume, checked the car's mileage, called my work to verify I was really there. I felt like a prisoner in my own house. And the worst part is, I couldn't talk to anyone about this because I was embarrassed to admit what was happening. My parents knew something was wrong because they noticed I was super stressed, but I just told them it was work, and that Stephanie was having problems with postpartum depression, which was true, but not the whole story. One afternoon I got home from work, and the house was destroyed. I'm not exaggerating, like it looked like a tornado had passed through. The drawers were open, clothes were thrown everywhere, the mattresses were flipped, everything was upside down. Abigail was in her crib crying, completely alone, with a dirty diaper and clearly had been like that for hours. Stephanie was in our room, sitting on the floor surrounded by papers and things from my drawers, and when she saw me come in, she told me she knew I was hiding something and she was going to find it. I yelled at her. What the hell was she doing? How could she leave the baby alone, crying like that? And she started screaming that I was a liar and a cheater, and that I ruined her life. I grabbed Abigail, cleaned her, fed her, and while I was doing all that, Stephanie kept in the room yelling nonsense. I called Stephanie's parents that night because I didn't know what to do anymore. I explained what was happening, that I thought Stephanie needed urgent professional help, that this was beyond normal postpartum depression. Her mom came the next day and talked to Stephanie for hours, but when she came out, she told me that Stephanie insisted I was the problem, that I was being unfaithful, and that until I admitted what I was doing, she wasn't going to be able to get better. I showed her mom my phone, showed her my pay stubs that proved the overtime hours, everything, and she believed me, but told me that Stephanie was so convinced of her version that it was impossible to reason with her at that moment. The physical violence started like 2 weeks later. I had decided I had to finish the work project no matter what it cost because we needed the money and it was almost done. But every day I came home was a nightmare. This particular night, I arrived like at 10 because I had to stay later, fixing a last-minute problem, and Stephanie was waiting for me at the entrance. Before I could even say hello, she started yelling at me where had I been, who had I been with, and I told her tired that at work, same as always. She told me she was getting tired of my lies and that Kimberly was right, that I had never really loved her, and I made the mistake of telling her that Kimberly was a busybody who was destroying our marriage and that she needed to stop listening to her. That's what made her explode. Stephanie lunged at me and started hitting me. Not slaps. I'm talking about closed fists to the face, to the chest, wherever she could reach me. I tried to grab her hand so she would stop, but she was like possessed, screaming that I was hurting her even though I was just trying to protect myself. She landed a direct hit to my nose and I felt the blood start to run, and that's when I knew this was no longer something I could handle alone. I managed to break free, grabbed my phone and my keys, and told her I was leaving. She yelled at me that I couldn't leave, that if I left it was proof I was having an affair, but I was already walking toward Abigail's room. There was no way I was leaving my daughter in that house with Stephanie in that state. I just couldn't. I grabbed Abigail, grabbed her diaper bag and some things quickly, and left the house while Stephanie followed me yelling. I went straight to my parents' house, which was literally like 20 minutes away. And when I got there, my mom almost fainted seeing me with a bloody face carrying the baby. I told them everything, absolutely everything, including the things I hadn't wanted to tell them before about how Stephanie had been treating me. My dad wanted to call the police immediately, but I told him to wait, that I needed to think, that Stephanie clearly wasn't mentally well, and I didn't want to ruin her life with criminal charges. Looking back, I probably should have called the police that same night, but in that moment, I still had this stupid hope that things could be fixed. I stayed at my parents' house that night, and like at midnight, someone started banging on the door like crazy. It was Stephanie and Kimberly. And when my dad opened the door, Stephanie started demanding that I give her back Abigail, that I had no right to take her, that she was the mother. Kimberly was there backing her up, saying I was an emotional abuser and that I was manipulating the situation. My dad told them to leave or he was going to call the police, and Kimberly had the nerve to say, "Go ahead," that they were going to call the police too for kidnapping. Stephanie was crying hysterically, and part of me wanted to go out and hug her and tell her everything was going to be okay, but the other part knew that if I gave Abigail back to her in that state, something bad could happen. The next day I went to see a lawyer, because this was already completely out of control. The lawyer advised me to document everything, to take pictures of my injuries, to save all text messages, to write a record of everything that had happened. He also suggested I start the process for a restraining order and request temporary custody of Abigail. I didn't want to do any of those things, honestly, because I still felt like I was betraying Stephanie. But the lawyer made me see that my priority had to be my daughter's safety, and he was right. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Stephanie called and texted me constantly, sometimes begging me to come back, sometimes threatening to take Abigail from me forever, sometimes accusing me of being with another woman, now that I was free. Her parents also called me, trying to serve as intermediaries, but every time they suggested that Stephanie needed to see a psychiatrist or get real help, she flatly refused. She said she wasn't crazy, that the problem was me, that if I would just admit what I had done, then everything would be fixed. Kimberly was still there, all the time, whispering things in her ear. And Stephanie's parents told me they had tried to ask Kimberly to step back a bit, but Stephanie wouldn't allow it. Said that Kimberly was the only one who understood her. Stephanie's condition got much worse. Her mom called me worried because Stephanie had stopped eating, barely slept, and spent all day at home looking at old photos of us and the baby. They had tried to take her to the doctor, but she refused, said she didn't need help, that all she needed was for me to stop lying. I felt terrible, obviously, because this was the woman I loved, my daughter's mother, and seeing her destroy herself like this was horrible. But at the same time, I couldn't go back. I couldn't expose Abigail to that environment. And frankly, I was starting to be afraid of what Stephanie might do to me if I went back. The situation reached its lowest point when Stephanie's parents called me one day in a panic, telling me they had found Stephanie unconscious in the bathroom. They had taken her to the emergency hospital, and the doctors said it was a combination of severe dehydration, lack of sleep, and what appeared to be a complete mental breakdown. Stephanie was delirious, saying things that didn't make sense, and the doctors decided to admit her to the psychiatric wing for evaluation and treatment. I went to the hospital to see her. I don't know why. I guess I needed to see with my own eyes that she was alive. When I walked into her room, Stephanie was sedated, hooked up to IVs, and looked so small and fragile that I started crying right there. Her mom was there and hugged me, and we both cried together because this was so unfair, so cruel, and neither of us knew how it had gone so far. While Stephanie was in the hospital, Kimberly decided to take action on her own. Turns out that Snake went and filed for a restraining order on behalf of herself against me, claiming I was emotionally abusive and a threat. In the application, Kimberly made up a bunch of things, like that I had threatened Stephanie, that I had taken the baby by force, that I had a history of violent behavior, all complete lies. When I received the court papers, I was furious, like angrier than I had been in this whole situation. This woman who wasn't even part of my family was actively trying to destroy my life, and the worst part is, she was doing it using Stephanie's name as an excuse. The day of the court hearing was surreal. Stephanie had already been released from the hospital but was still under her parents' care and in psychiatric treatment. Kimberly showed up in court with her lawyer, all dressed professionally and acting like she was a hero defending her friend. My lawyer had prepared a solid case. We had photos of my injuries. We had medical records from Abigail's traumatic birth and Stephanie's history of postpartum depression. We had testimonies from both sets of parents. We had text messages showing the pattern of unfounded accusations. When it was Kimberly's turn to speak, the judge pressed her on how she could personally know I was a threat when she didn't live in our house and had never witnessed any of the things she alleged. Kimberly started contradicting herself. Like, first she said she had seen certain things, but then admitted Stephanie had told her about them, and the judge clearly didn't believe any of it. What really changed everything was when Kimberly's lawyer called Stephanie as a witness. Stephanie's parents had brought Stephanie against her will because the court had ordered it, and when Stephanie took the stand, she looked terrible. Like she hadn't slept in days. She probably hadn't slept well. The judge asked her directly if I had ever been violent with her and Stephanie. With this super low and tired voice, said no, that I had never hit or threatened her. Then the judge asked her if I had taken Abigail by force, and Stephanie said no, that I had left with the baby after she attacked me. Kimberly looked like I was about to explode while Stephanie was saying all this, and my lawyer then asked Stephanie directly if Kimberly had convinced her I was having an affair without any real evidence. Stephanie started crying and said yes. That Kimberly had told her that no man works that many hours without a reason, and that she had wanted to believe Kimberly because at that moment she couldn't trust her own thoughts. The judge dismissed the restraining order immediately and gave Kimberly a lecture about using the legal system for personal vendettas or whatever she was trying to do. He also told Kimberly that if she filed false documents again or interfered in family matters that were none of her business, there would be serious legal consequences. When we left court, Stephanie approached me while her parents talked to my lawyer. She looked me in the eyes and told me, "I'm sorry, Jonathan. I'm so sorry. I know I ruined everything and I know you probably hate me." I told her I didn't hate her, but that I needed to know she was going to continue with her treatment and that she was going to let Kimberly leave her life forever. Stephanie nodded and told me she had already told Kimberly she didn't want to see her again, that she had finally seen how toxic she was and how she had taken advantage of her most vulnerable moment. We had another meeting like a week later, this time with both families present and Stephanie's therapist. Stephanie explained that the doctors had diagnosed her with severe postpartum depression that was never treated, and that worsened to the point of causing brief psychotic episodes where she really believed the things Kimberly told her. She told me she understood if I wanted a divorce, that she didn't blame me at all, and that the only thing that mattered to her now was making sure Abigail was okay. I asked her if she wanted to have visits with Abigail, and she surprised me by saying, no, not yet, that she didn't trust herself to take care of a baby, and that she needed to focus on getting better first. She told me she wanted to sign the papers giving me full custody temporarily, and that when she was better we could talk about supervised visits. We signed the custody papers last week. Stephanie is still living with her parents and goes to therapy 3 times a week. She's taking medications that apparently are helping her quite a bit. She texts me every few days asking how Abigail is, and I send her photos and videos because I feel it's important for her to maintain that connection, even if she can't see her in person yet. I don't know what's going to happen with our marriage. Honestly, like part of me still loves her, but another part I don't know if I can forgive everything that happened. Or rather, I don't know if I can trust that it won't happen again. My therapist, yeah, I'm going to therapy now too, tells me I don't have to make big decisions yet to focus on taking care of Abigail and my own recovery. Abigail is 7 months old now and growing super fast. My parents help me so much. My mom takes care of her while I work, and honestly, I don't know what I'd do without them. Abigail is a happy baby, smiles all the time, and when I hold her and she hugs my neck, it's the only moment where I feel like all this was worth it. Sometimes, my mom asks me if Stephanie is going to come back someday, and I tell her, I don't know, that maybe, that it depends on if she really gets better. What I do know is that never again will I allow someone like Kimberly to get close to my family, and that if Stephanie and I are going to try to fix this, it has to be just the two of us. Without outside influences, without nosy people, just us trying to rebuild what was broken. For now, that's enough, I guess.